Welcome to One-on-One. I'm your host, Lee Adams, and thank you for tuning in today. Today we're going to go into the healthcare field. Some of the questions we all have, where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? And today we're going to talk about some of our healthcare providers. We have great healthcare providers in the city of Pittsburgh. Our guest, we're going to talk about mainly palliative care, and it's something that you don't hear maybe a lot. You hear about the hospital, somebody's sick, and if it's real bad, they go to the hospice, but palliative care is in there somewhere too, and that's what we're going to do today. And with us, two special guests. We have the inpatient palliative provider, director, Dr. Ethan Silverman. Dr. Silverman, it's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we also have, as I've heard, an end-of-life social worker at UPMC, Talia Padawer. Did I do okay with your name, Talia?
You did, Lee. I'll just correct you. I'm a palliative care social worker.
Okay. That's good. Correct me anytime. My ego's not in this. But let's just start with, I want to talk to you two for a bit, but why don't we just talk about how can you describe, Dr. Silverman, how can you describe what palliative care is?
Yeah, I think it is a great question because I think sadly a lot of patients and families don't really know who we are and what we do. And to be honest with you, Lee, sometimes our other healthcare colleagues don't really know who we are and what we do. So I think we are a team. We are a team of doctors, nurses, social workers, pharmacists, and we provide an extra layer of support for patients who have a life-limiting illness or a chronic disease. And we help kind of in two main ways. So one, we are experts in symptom management. So patients having a lot of pain or nausea or shortness of breath, we can help there. And I think the other thing that we do is we take the time to talk to patients and to families about what are the things that are most important. What are their goals? What are their values? And if sadly the disease is making some decisions for us, how do we continue to honor the things that are most important to the patient?
So Talia, where do you fit in this part of healthcare?
I'm just one of 15 social workers practicing in our palliative care group in different hospitals. So Shadyside is one big one. We have Presby and St. Margaret's and Mercy and a couple others as well. And we have social workers that are attached to the palliative care team to provide additional support to patients and families. And I just want to highlight that something that is often a misconception about palliative care is that we just swoop in when we are talking about end of life, but palliative care could follow from diagnosis through end of life and anywhere in between if there are needs, either from the patient perspective or also family support. We meet patients and families in their rooms in the hospital, and we do a psychosocial assessment. And we find out how we can be helpful, kind of in a very patient and family-centered approach to just meeting their needs. And sometimes it's just active or empathic listening. Sometimes we can help with resources. And yeah, there's a variety of things we do. I want to highlight too that at Shadyside we have an amazing grant that my colleague Zarina Kulik helps apply for and manage. And it allows us to do legacy work at the bedside with either or like the patients or family members, depending on kind of where we are in the hospital or illness trajectory.
Explain what legacy work means.
So legacy can mean different things to different people. It's kind of how we look back, at our life and so part of it is life review. So we'll often do that as a lead up to kind of introducing the opportunity to do legacy work with a patient or a family member, and to be able to, to kind of reflect back on someone's values and memories, like their families, their loved ones, and kind of do something, a little project that honors, their personhood and their legacy and memory. So it is true that often we do it most at the hospital when someone is dying, but not always. Sometimes when a patient can participate, like we would kind of explore if they enjoy letter writing or reminiscence and documentation of either in writing or oral history recordings. We'll do fingerprinting and create different keepsake items for family members. And so there's just a variety of things that we could do. I often tell patients or a family member, depending on who I'm working with, that I love it when they bring ideas and kind of creative ideas to do something that's personal to their family story or to that patient's story. And I've worked on a couple of unique projects with family members, and it gives me kind of just great pleasure and satisfaction.
Any that you could think of that of note, that kind of thing? Yeah,
so like I said, I think the most popular one, and it's not always meaningful to everyone. We try to make sure that we at least offer it, but it's not always appropriate in every situation or under every circumstances, depending on kind of the clinical encounter and what is happening. But so we often will obtain fingerprints from the patient, and I've done post-mortem fingerprinting as well in the hospital. Me and my colleagues have done it. And so we will then kind of chat with family members about, what would be kind of most meaningful to create from it.
And what kind of things can you create from those fingerprints?
Jewelry are famous and popular because, people can kind of have it close with them, and just it's kind of a daily and a constant reminder of their loved one. I have done a project with a wife of a patient who was discharged to hospice at home, and there was a whole story with like a sketch from the patient, and we did a picnic set because he loved the outdoors. And the image that was on the picnic set represented kind of the family business and that the patient grew up in. What else have I done?
Heartbeat recordings.
Letter writing. So sometimes we have packets of letters with prompts that ask for the patient to reflect on different milestones or kind of write cards in anticipation of milestones that maybe they will miss for like close family members.
Do you do recordings like Dr. Silverman said? Do you also record their voice?
We offer that. Me personally, I haven't had an opportunity to do that. I've referred a couple of patients to an organization that does like legacy movies. So it's a nonprofit, kind of a one-woman show actually, that they do kind of this interview, and it's recorded, and she edits it, and wow. And so that's an organization that's a third party, and there are several of those that we could, depending on kind of what is feels special or there's a connection for the patient and the family.
Interesting.
I would say too that for little kids, either grandchildren or children of someone who is dying, we have done like stuffed teddy bears with an inscription with the person's letter, like handwriting message, a handwritten message, or kids' books that are recordable, there's like the world is your oyster with the ideas. That's why I love it when it comes from either a family member or a patient. I've done like there was a patient that there was an image of her and her husband who was now dying, and it was very meaningful, that little picture, and I suggested maybe having it through a vendor on Etsy made into a painting. So an artist through the platform called Etsy recreated the image, but in just a larger form and like a painting, and it's framed. So things like that are kind of emotionally evocative and stimulate
Meaningful, very meaningful.
I think to Talia's point, I think, first of all, it's wonderful that we have access to this. I think it is another example of how palliative care as a specialty in general, but certainly the palliative care group at UPMC, really tries to scale to the needs and desires of the patient and the family, right? So there are all these options, but trying to figure out what actually brings the most joy and meaning to that individual patient, to that individual family.
Right.
So Dr. Silverman, Talia said empathic and active listening. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think you know, a mind-blowing event in my training was when someone showed to me that if you rearrange the letters of silent, you can create the word listen. And I think a lot of our job is sitting there and listening to the patient. And how do you listen to the patient? You are silent. And so, you know, there was a time during my fellowship training where I was taking care of a patient in a veterans hospital, and he was a very stoic gentleman and had a lot of different health concerns, and, you know, very dutiful family coming in and out, but wasn't really sharing a lot about what was going on in his mind. And I had been talking to my supervisor and trying to figure out kind of ways of helping to support this patient, and what can we do to kind of better understand who he is. And I had made the suggestion, okay, I really want to try just being silent and seeing what happens. And so I was in the room, and we were kind of talking and exchanging pleasantries, and the conversation just kind of came to a lull. And I was just silent. I just sat there and gave the patient the opportunity to kind of speak and to talk and to self-reflect, and potentially self-reflect, and then potentially be willing to talk more. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, it was very, I think, I don't know of a single culture or society that values silence, and so there's always this kind of anxiety of when
Like
there's
awkward pause.
Exactly. And so it was very awkward for me to be there, to not be saying anything, but I was very intentional of trying to kind of create a space for this patient to feel comfortable and sharing more. And that's exactly what happened. After what seemed like an eternity, the patient opened up about how he has actually been thinking a lot about how he's coming to nearing his life, the end of his life, and how in many ways he's actually come to terms with that, but now trying to think about how is he going to prepare his family. One of the most important things is how his family is going to do after he has taken his last breath.
Sure.
And I am confident that if I had not given that space to him, if I had not given that silence to him, that we would never have had that conversation.
Well, on our show, we try not to have awkward
Well,
pauses.
so there's a time and a place for it, to your point.
That's right. We try. I
yeah.
have this engaging style of communication, but I appreciate that story. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so true that we just need to listen to people. But you said the words empathic and active listening. So why don't you talk about that? Because a lot of people will listen to respond. And why don't you talk about the listening that you just described?
So some of it is also in kind of nonverbal communication. I think we make a very conscious effort to try to find seats. In a hospital environment is difficult because we're constantly interrupted and there aren't a lot of places to sit, especially if family is visiting, which we want them to, right? But so we make an effort to pull in chairs into the room, we sit down, we lean forward, we just let either the patient or the family member that's speaking kind of maybe lead the conversation depending on the situation. I think that for me as a social worker, a lot of times I will walk in to a room without much of a set agenda and just see, at least in the initial consult, I would sit and I would just try to get a gauge on the situation and see if I should do more listening or more talking, and kind of meet the person where they are. I think we are very conscious about involving, like if there's multiple family members, if we kind of are aware of a certain family dynamics, we would facilitate kind of a group discussion where everyone is feeling heard, because we know that people value that, and it's often very stressful situations, crisis situations that we walk into.
Oh, you mean because of the severity of the illness?
Or what is going on clinically. Say we're in the ICU and a patient was just intubated, or there's a decision to just intubate, or just, I don't know, they're going into renal failure, and we're talking about kind of life support, life-sustaining treatments, and obviously there are emotions, involved, and family is, so we try to kind of provide a therapeutic space, and make sure that our families and patients are feeling heard. I think that's key. I want, like, Ethan to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sadly, you have to be sicker and sicker now to get into the hospital, right? What was an admission 20, 30 years ago is now managed as an outpatient. So almost by definition, if you're in the hospital, that means you're sick, and probably pretty sick. And obviously, even within the hospital, there's various layers of how sick you are. And as palliative care providers, as I said, who are the people that we see? We see patient or how we can help. So we help with being experts in symptoms and taking the time to talk to patients and families. And so if you think, who in the hospital wouldn't potentially benefit from that additional support? Well, everyone would benefit from that, but there's not enough of us to see every single patient in the hospital. So kind of the space that we have carved out is we see patients with a life-limiting illness or a chronic disease. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a potential for cure, or there isn't even potential for years of living with this life-limiting illness. But if palliative care is involved, then that typically means that time may be limited. And our job is to make sure that however much time there is, that it is as meaningful time as possible. And how can we help facilitate that is by listening, by taking the time to understand what is meaningful for that person. Because what is meaningful for them is by definition different than what is meaningful for me, or what is meaningful for their wife, or meaningful for their kids. And if we don't take the time to ask, even if it's a hard question, even if it's just pushing that a little bit further than what other providers feel comfortable doing, if we don't ask, then we don't know. And if we don't know, then sadly things can happen to a patient, not for a patient, because it's not in line with the things that are important to them.
So do they teach in medical school how important listening is in bedside manner? What do they teach about in medical school?
Yeah, so that is a great question, Lee. And I think fortunately, I'm a clinician, but I'm also a clinician educator, and so education is very important to me, and I'm very much, you're preaching to the choir about the importance of this. I think more and more there's a realization that this is important, and more there's a realization of we need to be talking to patients about what is important and making sure that we are doing things for the patient, not to the patient. There is always going to be a need for specialized palliative care, but more and more I think people are realizing the importance of what we call primary palliative care. Every single physician, every single provider in a hospital needs to be able to talk to patients and families about what are the things that are important, of making sure that, heaven forbid, if you were to get sicker, what are the things that are important to you? Being able to have those conversations.
I think, if I may, I think it's a great segue to advanced care planning. That is another element of what we try to encourage and promote in the hospital setting, but also our palliative care counterparts in the outpatient setting. And we did forget to bring in examples of these documents, but it's something that either comes up kind of organically in conversation, or we maybe like there's a red flag for one of us and we're like, we should discuss some things or bring that up with the patient and and close family members. And we often try to clarify surrogate decision maker, like who the person is or persons. Sometimes it's more than one. There are next of kin laws or a law in Pennsylvania that decides the hierarchy of who is the next person if the patient is incapacitated and is not able to make decisions for themselves. And so we tried to document, first have the conversation if kind of it's a good moment and the patient wants to talk about that with us, and document it, and maybe encourage them or have them complete an advance directive. I don't know if you want to just give more information about what it is and other advance directive documents that we do in the
I
hospital.
think, the importance of, even if it's difficult to talk about, of having the conversations of, if heaven forbid you were to be so sick that in order to get more time, you would need to be on dialysis or you need to be on a ventilator or whatever it is. Of having those conversations before it's critical, when you can actually have the time to kind of talk about it and think about it and actually have the time to talk about it with your family, I think is really important. And I think there's lots of documentation or lots of forums out there. I think a lot of people get confused with the difference between kind of medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney. Financial power of attorneys or those types of documents often require lawyers or notaries or things like that. For the medical world, oftentimes it just needs to be two witnesses who are not involved in any of the other paperwork. And so it's actually not usually a very big lift or hard to do to get these documents filled out.
So I do some work. I go into the schools and I teach about organ donation and transplantation. And I really enjoy going to these high school health classes, and I get a chance to throw some things in that I want to throw in on top of that, because I want them to understand what it takes to be an organ donor and how many lives you can save, And so one of the things I add is about being a good communicator.
Mm-hmm.
I tell the students, I said, it can serve you in your life to become a good communicator. And what does that mean? That means you're able to express yourself and to ask questions and listen. And there's a difference between listening to respond versus active listening to understand. And that's why I wanted to go there with you. So, and I asked them, where do you think this could help you? And someone will say, well, if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, I'm like, yeah. Or if I'm married with a wife and a husband, yeah. With kids, yeah. How about at work? Yeah. And so all good communication can just elevate any situation, whether it be a friendship, a marriage, a family, a work, a doctor-patient, social worker-patient. And so I'm glad to hear what you said about medical schools are starting to look at this more, because, I've been in the hospital a few times in my life and I've seen doctors with really good bedside manner and really bad bedside manner. And it really boils down to communication.
I agree.
It's really what it is.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science, but I don't think it's easy for everybody to communicate, because we have introverts, we have extroverts. I mean, obviously I'm an extrovert, but I feel like, and this is a good job for me because I like to engage and learn and listen. But when I think about what type of doctor I want, I generally want someone that's going to listen to me. And not all are very good at that. And so it kind of gets interesting when you get in that. So I'm glad we're talking about this. So you're saying, though, that you think that medical schools are starting to deal with this more?
Yes, 100%. I think the challenge, and it's not worth going into a lot of detail about medical education, but the challenge is, in some ways it's a zero-sum game, right? So if I'm trying to add X, if I'm trying to add more teaching around communication, then what am I taking away, right? Because I still only have a fixed amount of time for this learner to be in medical school, to be able to then go to residency and then get the training in residency, and then a lot of people then go on to so there's lots of layers of training, and I think, to your point, communication 100% needs to be part of that training. I think that level and expertise of communication is probably pretty dependent on the specialty, right? So me as a palliative care provider, I would like to think I'm a good communicator, because that's a lot of what I do, is needing to be able to have really at times challenging and at times nuanced conversations, and often around being really sick. And so I need to be able to have that level of training and that level of expertise in communication. To your point, every provider needs to have some amount of expertise in communication. Being able to have those kind of complex, nuanced conversations, particularly around end of life or being critically ill or having a life-limiting illness, that's a lot of what palliative care providers do, and they have then had additional training in communication. A lot of my fellowship training in hospice and palliative care was around communication. Also symptom management, but a lot of it was communication.
You know, in a life behind me, I worked for Ryan Homes, and I was in sales, and then they put me in construction management. So I go into construction management. I'm in charge of 3 communities. I'm building 18 homes at one time, and I didn't have any construction background. And so I am feeling very insecure about walking into the situation. So I went into the boss and I said, hey, like, I don't know anything about construction. And I said, you want me to build people's homes? I said, so how's this going to work? And he looked at me and he said, Lee, there's 2 things. You have to learn how to build homes, and you have to talk to people. I would rather have someone that knows how to talk to people, because we can teach you to build homes.
100%.
But you can know 1,000 things about how to build a home, but if you don't know how to talk to someone, we're in trouble.
Yep.
And so this is what I'm saying. I think I get that you're taking away, but I can't think of anything. Well, I mean, obviously, as a doctor, you need to know you're technical, and you're trying to dissect some really difficult situations, and I get that. But I think communication is so essential, and I can already tell both of you are really good at that, and that would help you be good at your job, because you're dealing with some tough situations, and people are facing the end of their life. I mean, it's so emotional. You must really deal with a lot of emotions, Talia.
Yeah. Can I just add that, active and empathic listening is key, but also something that I take, from my social work training, like a principle that I carry with me into this work, and I'm sure into the rest of my career, is a concept called unconditional positive regard. It's a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers came up with it, I think in the 60s or 70s.
Say that again?
Unconditional positive regard, where we walk into a situation with kind of maybe, the least amount of bias and prejudice and just, preconception. And we just meet someone where they are and offer, that empathic listening, and it's difficult to do, to stay engaged, and not let your mind wander, but just.
Do you mean when they start to ramble?
Well, that happens too, and sometimes also in very emotionally charged and maybe awkward situations, maybe a time of crisis, say, I don't know, anything that could happen in the hospital, sure. Right? A family member or a patient is really frustrated or angry or just grieving, and so, yes, emotions do get very intense, and just to be kind of a calm and compassionate presence, even without words, and just being there for people. And I think people sense that, they pick up on it and they feel valued, and I've heard feedback that just this week, earlier this week, with a new consult, a new person that I met for the first time on Monday, after spending, and that's a luxury sometimes and a privilege to be able to have that time with patients in the hospital when many could go in and out of the room and try to like keep it as quick as possible. I, as a palliative care social worker, can go in there and, you know, if I see that there's a need, I could stay longer.
So there's not a time clock on you?
You know, there is, because we are trying to get to, you know, the patients and the situations that need us, but I do have, this is my whole focus. This is our whole focus as palliative care social workers, because the full title is palliative and supportive care. And our role is really to just sometimes just sit there, you know, with patients or a family member when a patient is, I don't know, being transferred to the ICU and maybe they're rapidly declining and we're just in the family lounge and, you know, we're just sitting there with them. Sometimes our chaplains, you know, are also really important, supportive presence, you know, spiritual and supportive care in those situations as well. And so we work in tandem with our chaplains, and we're all kind of supporting each other through this very emotionally intense work that we do.
So, Dr. Silverman, I just want to learn a little bit about you and how you got here.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago.
Okay. Is that where Barack Obama lived?
So I lived 3 blocks away from Barack Obama's house.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
I mean, I just threw that out there.
Yes.
And here we go. You're
Yes.
one of his neighbors.
Yes.
So I guess they were proud of him where he got to go in life.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so you're in the south side of Chicago, and how are the public schools there?
They were challenging. So the south side of Chicago.
Did everybody look alike where you went to school?
No. So what's interesting about, so I grew up in Hyde Park, Kenwood. And what's interesting about Hyde Park, Kenwood is it is actually fairly racially diverse for the south side
That's
of
a great
Chicago.
thing.
It is not particularly economically diverse, but it was racially diverse. I actually went to private school on the south side of Chicago, to a school that was affiliated with University of Chicago. It was actually the teaching learning school that John Dewey founded, in terms of kind of learn by doing pedagogy and that kind of new wave of thinking.
Who's John Dewey?
So John Dewey was an educator in the 1800s who came up with this new way or new idea of how students should learn. They should learn by doing. So kind of trying to get away from the Socratic method and actually have the students
It's great.
participate in their own education.
So then what made you want to go to be a doctor? Or what happened there?
Yeah, so my father is a physician, and for a while I was really interested in insects, and so I was...
Insects. Did
Yes.
you say insects?
I said insects.
I think I heard that. Yeah. Okay.
So for a period of time, I was actually debating between getting a PhD and focusing on insects and entomology as the science of insects, or providing care to actual humans. And as more and more time kind of developed, I realized I wanted to be in a position to actually help people and provide care for people directly. So I applied for medical school. I did medical school in Detroit.
What school?
Wayne State in Detroit. And then I went back to Chicago to do my residency back at University of Chicago. So it was a wonderful experience to be kind of providing care to the community that I grew up in. And then for fellowship, so for kind of specialized training in hospice and palliative care, I went up to University of Wisconsin and then came here for a job.
So how do you compare Pittsburgh to Chicago?
Yeah, so I think similarities, so they are both a city of neighborhoods, which I find absolutely fascinating and really interesting and love. You know, being a transplant to Pittsburgh, I hypothesize that the reason that the city of Pittsburgh is a city of neighborhoods is because of the topography. So it used to be, you know, not particularly easy to get from one neighborhood to another. So every neighborhood had to kind of develop their own main drag. And so I'm making this up. So you as a native person can tell me if this is right or not. But this is what
I'm riding with you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Chicago is very flat. So I don't know how Chicago developed those kind of neighborhoods with all their own unique personalities. But I love Pittsburgh. I have been truly pleasantly surprised. I think it has a lot of the amenities of a bigger city without a lot of the hassles of a bigger city.
And how have you been received as a transplant? Because Pittsburgh has a lot of people that live here that have been here their whole life, or at least have gone away to college and come back to raise their families. So I always wonder how the native Pittsburghers are with people from other parts of the country that move in. So you can speak to it because you're one of those.
Yes. So far, it has been open arms. I mean, to be honest, I often plead ignorance when talking to patients and families about kind of where they live and you know, how long it takes them to get back and forth to the hospital, because that's an important part of our job, is, you know, making sure that families can actually be spending time with their loved ones if sadly time is limited. Or so I often plead ignorance when they say where they're from, and I say I'm new to the area. I've been here 4 years now, but I still say I'm new to the area and trying to get a better lay of the land.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you enjoy our city. I'm a little partial. I like Pittsburgh. I'm a Pittsburgh fan. So Talia, how about you? Where did you come from? Or where did you start?
Where did I grow up?
Yeah, we'll start there.
I was born and raised in Israel. I moved when I was in high school, going into sophomore year. My dad is American, but we grew up in Israel.
What part?
In the center, in a kibbutz.
Yeah.
I grew up in a kibbutz, which is a very unique and different kind of. There are different kibbutzim in Israel, and it's a kind of a collective community. There have been through an evolution of kind of from when they were first founded, but I am a child of the late 80s, and it was a great place to grow up in as a child. Kind of, my mom always said it's just a paradise, or it was at least a paradise for raising children. We moved to the U.S. when I was in high school, and then I left, and I went back to Israel, and I was in the military for a time. I left again, and I was globe-trotting for several years in my 20s, and I was just bouncing from one place to the other, working temp jobs, backpacking. I spent a lot of time in India, SoutheastSia, Europe, Central America. I learned Spanish on the way.
So how many languages can you speak?
My mother tongue is Hebrew, and obviously I use English much more now. Spanish, I am relatively fluent in. I studied it as my undergrad, later kind of in life. And then my husband's Italian, so I learned Italian with him and my in-laws who still live in Italy. But I'm barely conversational in Italian, but
wow.
yeah.
That's amazing.
So being a transplant, I'm also in the area for like 4.5 years now. It's different than some other cities I've lived in where there are more transplants, and it's kind of a different environment. Yeah. It does feel like it's maybe harder to build community here as a transplant because so many people have their high school buddies and
we have deep roots here.
And kind of they're built in community, and it's kind of hard to like make inroads sometimes. But in the hospital, there are times where you are asked as a provider, as a professional, as a clinician, about your story, so I think just kind of relating to what Ethan was saying, it's, I always say that I'm still familiarizing myself with Pittsburgh and Southwest Pennsylvania, and I'm a collector of stories, so I always, ask people, about their story. And
are you a question asker?
Yes, I think it depends on the encounter.
Tons of those around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a minority of people that ask questions to other people.
Yeah.
I always told my kids, just notice who's asking questions to you. And it's not a lot of people. Some people do that. So are you one of those people?
Well, definitely in my role and my capacity in the hospital in palliative care as a social worker. Yes, I'm trying to think if you're asking in my personal life. Yes, I've been working on my listening skills for sure. It's some people are more naturals, natural empaths or listeners, and but it is a skill that I think at least most people can cultivate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's great that you, because in your work, I mean, you have to ask questions and listen, right? I mean, it's just so important. But what a fascinating journey you've had to come to Pittsburgh, Talia.
Yeah.
That is quite
I
a
lived in New
story.
Mexico before and Canada before that. So I've just had a taste of just different cities in North America, and globally as well. And so I think that very much informs, my perspective and my approach to just meeting people in the hospital, and
You're a global citizen living in Pittsburgh.
yes, for sure. It's sometimes when I meet people at the hospital that have lived in one place their whole lives and are very much attached to either their Pittsburgh community or if they're from elsewhere in our region. Like I sometimes am envious. I think that it's people are very fortunate to have a robust support system when they are sick and when they have to be in and out of the hospital.
So you don't have that here.
No, I think I've built a good community of friends, but it's not the same when you have, say, your parents, your siblings, your adult children. Like my mom, our parents always tell us like, "Well, we wish we were closer," right? Where we would spend more time together. We do our best, but working with the folks that we work with, it really puts things in perspective about the importance of relationships and our family relationships, our friendships, and kind of how people show up for each other in a time of hardship and serious illness and kind of needing their supports. Because we have encountered situations where people have very poor or limited social supports, and I think that's always the hardest, in the hospital. And sometimes we have to do a lot of investigating to find a next of kin, to find somebody who would speak for the patient, and sometimes people die alone in the hospital, and that's always
Sad.
very sad and hard. Yeah.
Last question about about your life. So when someone that overseas or wherever it is, they say, "Well, tell me about Pittsburgh," what do you say? What do you say to them?
Is that for both of us?
Well, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
Because you're more of you're a global citizen.
You are a global citizen.
What do I say? I think it
And you can
depends
keep
on the
it
person
real.
that's asking, because different people in different periods of my life and from geographically different places, they have, different levels of knowledge of either the U.S., American cities, and so it depends who's asking. Pittsburgh obviously is the city of bridges and tunnels, and I think not a lot of people know that it's a very hilly city, very hilly terrain.
Oh, yeah.
I think we were surprised.
Yeah,
We moved from Albuquerque,
sure.
New Mexico, and everything is ranch style houses, what they call Pueblo style, and built wide. And when we arrived here, we were like, why is everything so tall and narrow and cramped together? But what do I say? I don't know. I grew to appreciate Pittsburghese, so kind of the Pittsburgh dialect of English, and everybody's a sports fan, and that is totally foreign to me because I've never in my life followed sports, either football or baseball or hockey. So I think it's interesting to kind of learn about how just important that is in the culture here and people's lives, their family lives, their community lives.
Yes,
So,
it's
yeah.
true. Our Pittsburgh Steelers are our biggest love, but we love our Pirates and our Penguins
Yeah.
and the Pitt Panthers, and It is a big thing, you know, because I think the Steelers probably put us on the map. I mean, I had a relative in Switzerland in the 70s, and they said they were from Pittsburgh, and they're like, Steelers in this Switzerland bar. And this is in the 70s before things got even more international. So that's, you know, we hold on to that, Heinz ketchup and Mr. Rogers and the wonderful parts of Pittsburgh. And we're proud of that, you know. So anyway, I appreciate you guys sharing a little bit about your life. So Dr. Silverman, with what you've been through with your job here, has it given you any thoughts about what you would want your end of life to look like and what you would hope that you could find in that time?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, one of the things so this work both simultaneously, you know, fills my cup and drains my cup, right? It is hard to be bearing witness to suffering, and a lot of my job is trying to alleviate those symptoms as much as possible. And when thinking about, you know, when my life is coming to an end, what are the things that are important? I think about what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that bring my life meaning? I think the other thing in doing this work that I've kind of realized more and more the importance of is, in order for patients to really talk about or share what are the things that are important, it has to be tied to what is going on medically, right? So if someone said, you know, Ethan, what are the things that are important to you? I would talk about how, you know, I love traveling and this work brings me a lot of joy and meaning, and so I'd want to keep working, and, you know, spending time with my wife and spending time with my dog and my cat, and I enjoy going out to eat. If someone said, Ethan, you only have 2 weeks left to live, what are the things that are important? My answer would be very, very different. It would be, I'm not working another second. I'm spending as much time as possible with my wife, and I'm eating as much butter and garlic and things because that's what brings me joy in the 2 weeks that I have left.
There you go. I mean, I was going to ask you, what brings you joy?
Yeah, so what brings me joy is spending time with my family, so spending time with my wife and spending time with my family of origin, of being able to garden when the Pittsburgh weather allows. This Indian summer has been very interesting for our plants at home, of spending time with our dog and our cat and seeing them, you know, fight with each other. And the work that I do does bring me joy, but if time was limited, I would not be doing that. But if I had more time, absolutely, I would continue to be doing this work.
So Talia, what brings you joy?
Well, I have 2 kids, 8 and 4.
Boys or girls?
The 8-year-old is a girl, and my son is 4. We have a dog, so obviously spending time with family. But I've learned that I also need to make time for getting together with friends and going out and doing things that are fun. I love to dance. I love to listen to music. You know, if I had more time, I would be exercising more. I would be cooking more, maybe baking. I think that, like Ethan was saying, it really, like, I think it's tough, you know, as a healthy person right now, a healthy young person to kind of try to picture what it would be like, you know, to face my mortality like more immediately. But it would really make time more precious. Like my extended family, so my parents, I have 2 siblings, I have nephews. I think I would want to prioritize spending time with them as well. We're relatively close family, and I think that would be very important for me. Yeah, right now, I mean, I'm kind of in the beginning of my social work career, and I think that
Is it meshing well with you?
Yes, What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, is it agreeing with you? Like, we all take a job. When I worked at Ryan Homes, God bless Ryan Homes, they build great houses for people, and it's important. But I wasn't passionate about it.
Yeah.
It was a job. I raised my family. I got this, buy my kids' education at Penn State. Like that brought me joy.
Right.
But it was a job. I wasn't passionate about it. That's what I'm saying. Does it agree with you in any kind of way?
Yes, I do think about, well, I think that every job, it is like could be rewarding or it could be meaningful
Stress.
for different ways, in different ways
Yeah.
for people. This work is, I think we say all the time that I think we share with bereaved families like how much it meant for us and how much of an honor and a privilege it was to to walk alongside of them during probably one of the hardest times, in their lives and in, their person's life. And for them to have kind of shared with us what they're going through and advocated for their person. I think that I can't think of anything that is more rewarding.
Yeah.
Can you? I honestly kind of stumbled into palliative care. It's my first job working in healthcare. I did not imagine that I would be working in a hospital, but I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be let in to these sacred and intimate moments, to be in the presence of a recently deceased person and their grieving family. It's yes.
Sacred ground.
Yeah.
100%.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. I don't want to forget this, so it just hit my mind, and I don't have it in my notes or anything, and it just hit me, and I want to say this because I think this is important. I want to give love, big love, to the nurses. Because, I've been in the hospital, I've had family in the hospital, I go into the hospital, I see these nurses, and they do such special work. And Dr. Silverman, why don't you speak to that too?
Yeah, I think, the nurses are the ones who are spending far and away the majority of the time with the patient. And so as much as possible, we try and include the nursing in our conversations with patients and families because they're the ones who are seeing what it's actually like for the patient to be in the hospital, what it's actually like for the patient to try and, transfer from the bed to the chair, and what if that's, a realistic opportunity for them when they leave the hospital or not. And so the nursing staff is an incredible advocate for the patient. They are doing a lot of work, oftentimes understaffed. Across the U.S., this is the case where they are understaffed and overworked, and they are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have available to them. And I would echo your sentiments, Lee, of you cannot sing their praises enough.
So Talia, what's your thoughts about nurses?
Well, I agree with Ethan. I think we come into contact with the nursing staff just every day, probably multiple times a day. I would often, go to the bedside nurse and kind of ask, is there anything that you would like to point out to me? Maybe it's my first time meeting the patient. Have they seen family at the bedside? Like we're just always collaborating with them and also other unit staff, like the discharge planners. And so they're really valuable. They're really the boots on the ground. And sometimes it feels that we come maybe once a day and we could have maybe an hour-long conversation, which is long, but they're for the long shift, and they're hands-on, taking care of patients, and so their input is valuable. And I think we always try to invite them to family meetings when we are discussing important medical decisions, because even if they don't have anything to share, it's good for them to hear, the discussion and kind of be on the same page as the rest of the care teams.
Well, I have major respect and major love for nurses. I think what they do is spectacular. They are the boots on the ground. They do deal with some really hard stuff, and they're trying to help people get better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I have nothing but major love, and I just thought about it, and I just wanted to bring it up because I figured you would agree. And I mean, who can't say that? I mean, certainly, you know, like in any profession, you're going to have people that, you know, are not the best. But, I mean, in general, where would we be without nurses in our hospitals? Where would we be?
Right.
Right. So, anyway, I appreciate that.
And families and patients, they often, like, we would often see them kind of share gratitude with, a lot of times it's food. They would bring, I think it's because they really connect with the nursing staff, especially if it's a long hospitalization. So they're the first ones to show gratitude and appreciation for the nursing staff, and it's lovely to see.
There's many times I've brought some food to the nurses in the hospital because I just appreciate them. They don't just help the patient, they help their families.
Yep.
Because, and speaking of families, could you say, Dr. Silverman, what would you say, how can a family help a patient that's looking at the end of their life right in front of them?
Yeah, I think when a patient is nearing the end of their life or critically ill in the hospital, they're obviously the one in the bed going through it, but it's not just them, right? It's the entire family who is going through this horrible time, and I think just giving everyone each other time and grace and space of, you know, every family has its own family dynamics, and every family has its, you know, own unique way of communicating to one another, but just acknowledging that, you know, in order for a family member to be providing care to their loved one who's in the hospital bed, they need to continue to be taking care of themselves. So if that means, you know, going home and sleeping in their own bed for a night, we encourage family members to do that. If that means, you know, just leaving the hospital bed for 10 minutes or so, or going for a walk, you need to continue to be taking care of yourself in order to help take care of patients.
Well, I just can't tell you I mean, this time has just flown by. And I mean, we're at the end of our hour, and I mean, it just really flew by. And I just can't thank you both enough for coming and spending some time with us. We had a lot of stuff about palliative care we could have talked even more about, but I just wanted to make this a little more personal about what we're dealing with in these hospitals. There's people that are close to death and it's on the horizon, and it's gut-wrenching. It's just so gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
And for not only the patient, but the families.
Yeah.
And you guys are there as the professionals. And so I just thank you for what you do.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Lee, sadly, you know, if a patient is critically ill, no matter what, they're critically ill, right? So just not talking about it, they're still going to be critically ill.
Right.
And so taking the time to talk about it, even if it's hard to talk about,
Yes.
it's important to talk about
Yes.
it. Because if we don't talk about it, we're not going to be able to honor the things that are important to the
Right.
patient.
So Talia, I want you to say whatever you'd like to say, or at the end here, what would you like to say about what you did, palliative care, whatever you'd like to say?
Yeah, I want to just agree with Ethan about that point of talking about it, about these subjects, even though it's hard. And I think that sometimes, like, our work is to, like, focus on maybe, like, normalizing, like, these conversations, and also to just, it's hard in the hospital setting because we are, you know, people coming to the hospital, it's usually not, you know, they're coming to get treated, but it's usually a very stressful time for them and their families. And so it may not always be the ideal moment to kind of talk about, planning for end-of-life care or just advanced care planning in general. But I think that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think you gave me like a prompt that was
okay.
very broad, and
okay.
I kind of lost like.
Well, so I think one of the things that Talia brought up that I think is important is we never stop providing care. We never stop providing treatment. But there's going to come a time, truly in everyone's life, where what that care and that treatment looks like is focusing on comfort, because we are unable to get the patient more meaningful time. Yep. So that the options are never, well, we could do this or we could do nothing. That is never the option, because we are always providing care. We are always providing treatment. But there's going to come a time where there might not be further life-prolonging therapies or further therapies that are going to get the patient more meaningful time. And so at that time, what that care and that treatment looks like is making sure that the patient is as comfortable as possible with however much time there is, that they are getting as much meaning and joy with their family, with the things that are important to them. Yeah.
And I think a big challenge is that, our culture and kind of the medicalization, of just in general has been kind of, sorry, I'm distracted because I'm thinking about my kids. You can edit that out.
That's okay. No, it's okay. It's real. We keep it real here.
Okay. I was just going to say that it's challenging because people come to the hospital, and the expectation is that, we do all the things to make someone better. And I think that that's always a good goal to have. But sometimes just, being able to recognize when maybe less is more is valuable, and we kind of shine the spotlight on these situations when we encounter them. And so that's, I think that's...
I just want to thank you both, Dr. Silverman, Talia. I want to thank you both for joining us today. You guys do really, really important work. I mean, we're all going to see the end of our life. We don't like to talk about it. I don't think our culture likes to talk about it, but it's fact. And, at that time, I think it's just so important for people, professionals there that provide comfort and pain relief and sensitivity. So that's what you guys do. I know that, I'm sure the families really appreciate you. You do very important work. I'm glad we could talk about it today, because I don't think a lot of people are running around saying palliative care because they hear the hospital, they hear the hospice, but you guys are in there too. And it's an important part of healthcare. I love to do shows on healthcare because health is wealth. It is. There's three things I think are wealth: love, health, and peace of mind. Yeah. If you have those three things, you're good to go. Yeah. You're good to go. But I thank you so much for joining us. And I thank you all for joining us also. I just want to leave you with this. I do teach some classes in high schools about organ donation. And I just want to say this. If your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle needed an organ transplant to save their life, would you take it? Sure we would. So with that being the case, I think that we all can be organ donors. And by being an organ donor, you can give the gift of life. You can't take it with you, so you can give the gift of life. And I have a friend right now that just got a live liver donor transplant, and she's doing fantastic. And from an altruistic donor, and that's someone that didn't even know her. Wow. It just said, you can go in and take 50% of my liver, and it both grows back. And so what a great gift to give to somebody is the gift of life. We've done some shows about that here, and this is why I love healthcare, because health is wealth. Thank you for watching. Please join us for another edition of One-on-One. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.